Susie, would you go ahead and open in prayer?
Lord, we praise you for having this opportunity to just be with the person we love, our mate, and in a group of people that want to learn and grow and want to know, gain some wisdom and tools and your perspective on marriage, Lord, which is so important and valuable. And Lord, I pray that tonight might be a real encouragement. I just pray that we can think through all that we've heard and learned and begin to apply it to our marriages. Lord, I pray that tonight's topic might be very positive chance to look into the future and to share dreams. And I pray for grace, Lord, as we talk about unmet longings that we all have and how to handle that and to still look to you, Lord, and know that you have dreams for us, Lord. You had a dream when you were born as a human and came to make it possible for us to bridge our relationship with the Father through your death. And so, Lord, that was your dream, and you have a dream for our lives. You have a vision for our lives, and I just pray that our hearts would align with that. We would want that for ourselves, and that we could have joy in setting our hearts in that direction. And just bless everything about this night. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So I'd like to begin with a review of the house diagram. Hopefully you are becoming quite familiar with it. By the way, I do have extra copies of the house diagram on the table. If you've lost yours or if you would like another one, you can certainly grab one sometime tonight. But as you know from the diagram that we have up on the screen, we started out talking about how Christ is to be our foundation. And it is my desire that you hear me in terms of my strong passion for each of you to have a Christ-centered marriage. A Christ-centered marriage, I think, makes all the difference in the world. So if Christ is the foundation, then you are putting into practice the teaching of Jesus. And it makes all the difference in your application of principles for a healthy marriage. So the marriage covenant should be built on that, Jesus talks about God bringing two people together in marriage, and God's original design was that would be an intimate marriage that reflects something of the glory of God. And so we do talk in terms of a marriage covenant that needs to be expressed in terms of vows and commitment and trust and a deepening of the relationship based on the sense of commitment to Christ and commitment to one another. Then we talked about knowing and understanding each other in a much deeper way, and we have a lot of pages of principles there: the 3 sides of love, the rituals of connection, State of the Union meeting, stress-reducing conversations. Those are all things that if you put them into practice, your marriage will just go up a level. The real challenge for the marriage workshop is to learn a principle and actually put it into practice. Actually put it into practice in your home life and in your time together. We talked about the biblical roles of marriage, leading and responding. What does it mean to be a spiritual leader? And the problem of either being too aggressive or too passive for either the man or the women. And learning how to relate to each other in a way that gives direction to the marriage. Then talked about working through conflicts. That was the next level. And I understand every one of these topics could take 5 or 6 weeks of focus, right? So I understand that. But as we see couples work through their conflicts more productively, then they can really begin to pursue life goals and achieve God-given dreams, and that's where we are tonight. So the goals that we talked about last week really should be the kind of thing that couples will talk about regularly in terms of how are we doing with this, how are we doing with our parenting, how are we doing with our finances, how are we doing with our rhythms for life, how are we doing on all aspects of married life and family life. That's kind of the present tense experience of a couple. They're pursuing life goals together in the present tense. But tonight we're going to talk about achieving God-given dreams by God's grace, and that's more future-oriented, and it's a much deeper topic than just what I often talk to couples with young kids about is, their conversation tends to be about children, chores, and calendar. And it needs to be more than just children, chores, and calendar. And so tonight is going to give you a sense of what that more can be. What is our dream for our life? And so we're going to talk about achieving God-given dreams. Once again, in going back to the house diagram, if you're doing well in the lower levels, you really can see the possibility of talking through the upper levels. If you're not doing well in the lower levels, it's really hard to get there with the issue of where we're going and what is our future. So it's really, I see this as sequential and essential to work it through in such a way that you get to a place where we can have the topic that we're going to address tonight. So why don't you start with number one? Yep, you're on. It's on. The red button is on. It just, it's not working. Ross is working on it. You can get up really close to me.
All right. Sorry. All right. Be God given. That's our purpose. And we don't know that all the time.
We're going to get a new battery here.
We don't live like we know it all the time, but it's true. That is what we're created for. We're created to bring God glory. And our marriages are created. God brought us together because his original design was to bring him glory and all kinds of, like a sun and the rays coming out. I think of a good marriage as being a God-given, a God-glorifying marriage. Am I here? Okay. It is one where so many people in so many different lives are impacted by our marriages, not just our children, but our community, our workplaces, our churches, everywhere. Our marriages really affect. It has a ripple effect throughout our lives. So I'm going to just read a couple verses that are really good to think about. In 1 Corinthians 10:31, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all for the glory of God. So every day, no matter what our activities are, we can actually give God glory in our hearts, in whatever we're doing. And then another one of my favorite verses in 2 Corinthians, it says, for the love of Christ controls us, having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died, and he died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf. So this is such an important time of the year for me because I became a Christian 52 years ago. On March 19th, I was in high school, and I became a new person. I grew up in a church-going family, but when I finally understood that God created me and that he was who he said he was the Lord, and that he did die and rise, then I thought, well, I can no longer live for myself. I have to live for the Lord because He is the Lord of the universe. So that was a pivotal moment for me. And it's a pivotal decision for all of us. And then it's an ongoing decision to keep Him in the center of our lives. Somebody shared at a meeting about, Scott shared a really cool illustration at one of our deacon meetings about that we think a lot of times of the Christian life or our faith as being like part of a piece of the pie, like one slice of the pie, another slice of the pie is our family, another slice of the pie is our job, and so on. And He's a little, our religion or whatever is a little slice of the pie. But that's not, Jesus needs to be the whole pie. Like He needs to be the center of the wheel, and the spokes come out from that in every other area of our life. But He is at the center. So that's what we're talking about when we say the foundation of marriage needs to be Christ.
I was noticing that when I was selecting which translation to use for 2 Corinthians 5, that that's the New American Standard, but the CSB says, "For the love of Christ compels us." And so I didn't look into the Greek word for that, but I'm assuming that what's meant by that is that there's this underlying drive within us that when we embrace the love of Christ, that everything we do, we want to do to please Him. We want to do to live for Him. So a person who doesn't have that kind of compulsion, that kind of compelling, that kind of motivation to live for Him and have your life reflect the goodness of what He's done in your life, they may need to ask themselves if they're true believers, because a true believer will have this inner drive to want to please the Lord. And so the dreams that they have will be in context of being God-given. So number 2 says that we need to deal with the pain of disappointment and unmet longings of the past and the present. Why would I talk about that? Well, it's my conviction that when we start talking about dreams for the future, a lot of people have great difficulty dealing with that because of the disappointment that they've had with regard to their life experience up to that point. So they don't want to dream anymore. And so to get in touch with longings oftentimes results in getting in touch with pain, because you get in touch with unmet longings or disappointed longings or things that you wanted that you realized were not going to materialize. And so Susie was down in the basement last week, I think it was, and she told me that she found a cassette tape in the basement. Well, I was down there today cleaning up, and this is the cassette tape, and it's a teaching that I did called "What Do I Do with My Unmet Longings?" March 19th, 2000. Now, do we even have a cassette tape player anymore? I don't know. We could throw this away, I guess. But it's interesting because my ministry has largely been about helping people deal with unmet longings and helping people deal with the pain of that. And so I thought it would be good to make reference to this verse, which is what this sermon was about, was this verse. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life." And so what the author of Proverbs is acknowledging is that when you put your hopes in something and you realize that it's not going to happen, there's a potential of your heart getting sick from that. There's a potential for you being either angry or depressed or anxious, and you want to keep that from happening. A lot of people, particularly in marriages that are not going well, where their longings are delayed or deferred or denied, they end up developing a hard heart. And the hardness of the heart is what Jesus says leads to divorce. And so I think it's just really important to acknowledge the need to deal with the pain of unmet longings. So I actually did some digging this morning. My dog woke me up at 4:30 this morning, and so I was awake, and so I thought, I'm going to start looking, see if I can find some old slides on this kind of stuff. I found them. So here's up above is the presentation I must have given way back here. What are 3 ways of responding to the pain of unmet longing? Now, if you look in the back on page 48, you can see the diagram that I have there. So just flip back to page 48. You'll see my presentation on dealing with unmet longings. Above all else, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is the tree of life. And then what are 3 ways of responding to the pain of unmet longing? So what I did with this diagram, by the way, if this is too psychological and you don't like psychology, you can just wait till we get into something else. But these are my thoughts, okay? I didn't get this from a book. I didn't get this anywhere else. This is my own diagram and my own thoughts about this. But I've just, in noticing the way people respond, I noticed that the first thing happens oftentimes is they become real demanding. And by demanding, it's a real hot anger. So you can see the demandingness is kind of in your face. It's volatile. It's clingy. They're really dependent on whatever it is that they're wanting and needing. And so they dump this emotional pain. By the way, in the diagram, the E stands for emotion. So they dump the emotional pain on others. They may not talk to God about it, or if they do, they're pleading with Him. And I say that oftentimes people in this aspect of the diagram will focus on the relational component, which is intimacy, at the expense of maybe doing the things that they need to be doing. So in this way, if people are real demanding, the intensity, sometimes it shows up in the counseling office, sometimes it shows up in a fight at home, sometimes it shows up in other settings. Usually demandingness really pushes people away. Usually the volatility is such that the other person backs off. They can't handle that kind of intensity. And so most people have to realize they have to calm down. And so what they do is they go from this swing over to being demanding, swinging back over to the other side of then going into a denial mode. And in denial, instead of a hot anger, they get really cold. Instead of being volatile, they become hard. Instead of in your face, they become distant and independent. They stuff the emotional pain from self and others. They don't talk to God about their emotional pain. And they may focus on doing rather than on being in relationship. And that's really maybe it may feel a little better. In other words, I can't stay on the demand side, so it might feel better to be over on the denial side, but it's not much healthier. It's certainly healthier not to be yelling at somebody, but it's not healthy to stay here. Because here's where the hardness of the heart can really set in. Here's where the coldness can really set in. So I find that people with unmet longings oftentimes swing back and forth between being real demanding or being in denial of their own longings. And I really think we need to slow the swing of the pendulum down and help people stay more in the middle. And in the middle, I use the word desire. And that's individuals who recognize that they are feeling this pain, but they don't have to be demanding about it, and they don't have to deny it. Instead of being hot or cold, they're actually warm. Instead of hard or volatile, they're soft. Instead of in your face or distant, they're responsive. They're more interdependent. They can acknowledge the emotional pain and express it appropriately. They can express the emotion to God with trust and acceptance. They can focus on what they need to be doing, which is what I mean by impact, but they have a desire for intimacy. So I close this handout with these 5 recommendations for how to work on this. Number 1, take the pain to God in fervent prayer. Number 2, reach out for support and comfort of others. Help you process it and work with this. 3, choose to do what's right in the midst of the pain. Whatever difficult things we go through does not give us license to just sin or act out. We have to choose to do what's right even in the midst of our our emotional difficulty. Number 4, don't allow the pain to eclipse the joys of longing fulfilled. And and I think that's an important point, because I think a lot of times people are all or nothing in the way they're thinking. If I really had this, then I'd be really happy. Because I don't have this, I'm really depressed. And I think there's something in the middle that says I can live with the disappointment and the hurt and the fear and the anxiety, because God's giving me comfort, God's giving me grace. And there's a lot of things I can be grateful for, a lot of things I can enjoy. And so now, I don't know what's going in your head as you hear a diagram like this and this pendulum swing and all that, but there's so many examples of living in a fallen world where we have this kind of pain. Just think in terms of losses, and a loss of a loved one, or loss of a child, or a relationship that is not going well. We'll have lots of examples that you'll see as we go through this of what I'm talking about as I talk about this pendulum swing. So that could be a 1-hour talk right there, and I did it in 5 minutes. So, but my point of number 2 is you don't want it to kill your dreams. You want to deal with the longings in such a way that you can still have the dreams. So, Susie, take us to number 3.
Number 3, seek the Lord's will in all of our discussion and planning about the future. So it's one thing to plan, and it's another thing to seek the Lord's will in the plan. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. And I think the longer you're a Christian and live to please the Lord, you realize that He creates your heart's desires, and they line up with His heart's desires, and then they're fulfilled. A very sweet verse: "Whom have I in heaven but you, and besides you I desire nothing on earth."
To actually get to that place where you are so intensely intimate with the Lord that you can handle the pain of those unmet longings, almost as if, I don't need anything else. Now that's a challenge to get there, and yet that's what they encourage us to do in these Psalms. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him. He'll make your path straight. That's a meaningful verse for me, because as a child I grew up with getting birthday cards from my aunt, who was a single woman who never married. And she would sign all of her cards lovingly, Aunt Muriel, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. So when she died, my dad asked me what I thought we should put on her tombstone, and I said Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And what a great life verse. So many people have made that a life verse, that they want to have the kind of life where they trust the Lord with all their heart. Even when life is confusing, they don't rely on their own understanding of things, and ask Him to direct their life and their path.
And James 4:13 through 16, come now, you who say tomorrow or today or tomorrow we will travel to such and such a city and spend a year there and do business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be. For you are like a vapor that appears for a little while, then vanishes. Instead, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So, yeah. We don't know what tomorrow will bring at all. Health things and lots of accidents. We don't know. But
I had a good friend who is from India. His name is Abraham Thomas, and he went back to India to be a church planner. And I noticed his letters that came back in describing what they intend to do in terms of ministry. He would have in parentheses D.V. And I don't remember how I found out what in the world that meant. But he was actually using letters from the Latin Deo volenta. Now, how many of you know what the Latin phrase Deo volenta means? Well, it's God willing. So he would put all of his statements about, future plans in the context of Lord willing, God willing. James says if you make a plan without saying God willing, Deo volente, it's actually evil. It's boasting. It's like, oh my goodness, really? That's pretty strong. But think about that in reference to as you think about future plans. This is all subject to God's will and God working in your life circumstances to bring it about.
So number 4, we're getting into what we're going to be encouraging you to do with your spouse tonight. So we want you to be able to share with your spouse whatever dreams for the future that come to mind. What life experiences are you aware of that you have always wanted? I know it changes for life stages, and we're going to talk about that. But when I was very young, a new Christian, my dream was to go overseas. I had read God's Man in China about Hudson Taylor. That was really had a profound impact on me, and some other books that were mission oriented. And so I had a dream, but I was engaged to Dick.
And I did not have a dream of
he
going
did not have that
overseas.
dream. But I went without him, and just for a year, and fulfilled that dream, which was kind of rough, on our relationship. But we all have dreams, and we all have different dreams at different times in our lives. I think now our dreams have to do with our ministry, our life as we are aging, and our families, our grandchildren, and the dreams we have for that.
So if you have the right perspective of everything we've said tonight, your perspective is I want to be able to dream, and to dream in such a way that they're God-given dreams. What does God want for me? What does God desire for me? And if I deal with the pain of unmet longings of the past, and if I get to a good place where I accept God's will in my life and whatever He wants for me, then can I actually dream about things in the future that are important to me? That's what number 4 is. And so when you break up into small groups, to your couple time, when you're one-on-one with your spouse, we're going to ask you to go over 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8 in your time together, and then we're going to ask you to share something with your group at the bottom of the page 47 when you all get back together. So one of the ways that I've thought about these longings so my definition of a longing, I'm just making it up right now, but what I think of as a longing is a God-given desire, because I'm made in the image of God, and it has some strong, intense desire that's more than just, what am I going to have for supper tonight? It's more than just, what am I going to do to relax tomorrow? It's more than just living day-to-day kinds of things. It's deeper than that. It's a deeper longing that I have to make my life count and to be in meaningful relationship with others. And then the dreams are ways that you actually can see those longings at least partially fulfilled. So the dreams would be like, this activity can meet this particular longing that I have, this desire that I have, that it means something to me, and this is the thing that I can do that actually matches that. Does that make sense? So the longing is the deeper part of me, and the dream is what I can do about that. So one of the ways that I've illustrated it is this iceberg diagram. Now, there's a few people in this room that have seen this before, right? I mean, we're going back, like, I don't know how long it's been since but you'll see it in your notebook. If you flip to that page, it's page 49, it looks like this. And I'm not going to explain much about it other than just to say that the tip of the iceberg is the things that we're aware of in terms of our conscious thoughts and our conscious behaviors. It's the thing that we can focus on most of the time in our day-to-day life. But there's a real reality that underneath it, just underneath the surface, are feelings, thoughts, wants, and needs. If you turn the volume up on your thoughts, you actually might be surprised at what you're actually saying to yourself, right? Sometimes, have you ever been like, I mean, am I the only weird person that does this? Like, how did I get to be thinking about that? Well, before I was thinking that, I was thinking this. And before I was thinking this, I was thinking this. And, oh, that's how I got to thinking about this, you know? Well, if you turn up the volume on your thoughts and really hear yourself, that's just below the surface. And nobody else knows what you're thinking except God. But those feelings, emotions that you have just below the surface, those thoughts that you have just below the surface, those wants and needs, those are just below the surface. But the reality is that something's much deeper. That's the whole point of the iceberg, is that underneath the waterline is a real deep part of who we are. I forgot the proverb, but there's a proverb that talks about a man of understanding. A man's heart is like deep waters, but a man of understanding will draw it out. So it's going beneath the surface to draw out the deeper parts of who a person is in terms of their feelings, their core beliefs, their longings. And oftentimes what feeds the deeper parts of their feelings, beliefs, and longings is based on who they were raised, their family of origin, their background, their beliefs. All of that comes out of a lifetime of living. Now, if there was anything I was going to add to this diagram, it would be this, that all of our personhood, being made in the image of God, is both positive and affected by the fall. So we can have legitimate longings that are positive, and we can have legitimate desires. We can have, appropriate thoughts, but they are tainted by living in, being born in sin and living in a fallen world. So a lot of times it's mixed, right? So we have to do the hard work of sorting that out. And so as a person grows in Christ, they renew their mind, they begin to change some of their core beliefs, they begin to change some of the feelings they have about life based on their family background, and they begin to reorient their longings more to what God would have for them. Does that make sense? So the desire that I have tonight is that you guys, as couples, take what we're giving you tonight and begin to really work it over time. You're not going to get it done in 30 minutes, I promise you that. But to work this in time, to go down to the deeper parts of who you are. So back to page 46. Susie said, share with your spouse whatever dreams for the future that come to mind. What life experiences are you aware of that you've always wanted? And then I just referred to the iceberg diagram saying go deeper with that. Now, you want to...
Number 5 says, if your dreams for the future are very different from your spouse's dreams, acknowledge any particular conflicts that could arise between you. Instead of fighting about it, find out from each other why the particular dream is important to you. That's a big part of your counseling, isn't it?
Well, it is. It is. One of the interesting things that a lot of couples don't realize is that when they have a very intense conflict, there's probably the likelihood of underlying dreams behind it that they're not even aware of. And so an underlying dream needs to come out and understood in order to make sense out of why they're having the conflict. And so a lot of times, for example, couples could be butting against each other because this person has the dream for their career and their work, and this person has the dream for marriage and family, and these are conflicting right now, and so they're having a real difficult time in terms of honoring each other in terms of their dreams because they're too focused on their own. So that would be just a more obvious example of it. I was thinking the other day about this topic, and we have some of you may know this couple, but we had some friends of ours who he was a Delta pilot, and when he retired, they moved to Ely, Minnesota, which is the Boundary Waters. Now, can you imagine? What if one spouse said, I can't wait to retire so I can move to Florida, and the other spouse says, I can't wait to move to northern Minnesota. How did they make that work? Well, we know the couple well, and her underlying dream is always to go back to where they spent the summers at a cabin. She grew up going up there regularly. And he just happened to love fishing so much that he could handle that, because this is some of the best fishing in the world is up there. So they figured out a way to make that work. And now when they go for a walk, they have to put on their snowshoes. But can you imagine? So I just think a lot of times when you have a conflict, you need to just stop fighting and start asking each other, what is it that you're really wanting? Why is that important to you? Is there a story behind why that's important to you? Does that come from a history that I don't know about? And can you explore the other person's dream or longings or unmet desires that could be behind all of this stuff? So that's what we mean by number 5.
So number 6 just gives you a lot of different areas you can look at when you are talking with your spouse, that hopefully, this will bring up some of your core beliefs, some of your core desires, your longings. And we don't have to read off each one, but, G says ministry, so using spiritual gifts, that's, when I was writing down some of my dreams, I thought, well, I have dreams for using my home. That's a big dream of mine, using our home for our family, for promoting hospitality so that people connect and conversations can happen and all of that. So out of that comes my motivations to fulfill that dream that I have.
Yeah, and I think of these categories as from A through K as good examples of keenly felt longings that could lead to specific dreams. So I think most of you would understand what we're talking about in terms of relationships. Longing for close relationships, whether it's marriage, children, grandchildren, extended family, friends, so forth. A lot of us really focus on career-related dreams. So work and career certainly is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. The good health one is an interesting one because it's a variable that if you're not in good health, it can just consume everything else. He's like, I can't even think about my future or my dreams if I'm not functioning well. This last year was pretty difficult for me health-wise, and so I can relate to that. You had some challenges as well, but as we relatively have good health, we can then think in terms of the future and what our dreams are. Financial security and freedom, that's huge. So couples who are really struggling financially, don't have the freedom to pursue other options, may struggle with their longings. Susie mentions that she values the home as a place of ministry, so that's the type of home or the location becomes an important topic of conversation. Now, K is probably the one that just about everybody thinks of when they think in terms of dreams. K would actually be the place for those who are moving towards retirement to be thinking in terms of a bucket list. What are the places I've always wanted to go? What are the things I've always wanted to do? And what are the kinds of adventures I like to have? And so that's what's there. If you're a young couple with little kids, You're not thinking about that. You're just trying to survive today with the kids you've got, right? So as you look at these, reflect and journal about this in the future, and maybe do some writing on each of these, and then share it more with your spouse as well. But I would suggest that you use tonight as you go through 4, 5, and 6. Just see if there's one that really stands out that you'd like to share with your spouse. And what you'll do with number 7 is determine which life stage are you in. So for Susie and I, we're in the retirement stage. Others of you are in a different stage. So what kind of dreams or longings do you have in the stage that you're in? And then number 8, prayerfully determine if you have any God-given dreams for the future life stages. You probably won't even get to that tonight, but discuss this with your spouse. So again, we labeled this topic for tonight, Achieving God-Given Dreams by God's Grace. Recognizing it's by God's grace that we do anything in life, right? And to achieve it probably does require more than just talking about it tonight, right? To achieve it actually requires that you begin to discuss it more thoroughly and pray about it. Plan what your next steps are, plan and pray about it. Take those next steps and pray about it. And I would want every single individual in this room to be thinking in terms of what does God have for me moving forward? What does God have for us moving forward? Sometimes the dreams can be individualistic. In other words, she has a dream to do this. I remember hearing about one couple where the wife actually had a dream to climb to the base of Mount Everest. And the reason she had that dream was because she had polio as a child, could hardly walk. So for her to actually be able to get to the place where she could walk, and then to exercise regularly, and then to begin climbing, and then work toward the goal of going to the base of Mount Everest, that was her bucket list dream. Her husband said he'd get dizzy just climbing a ladder. It's like, he's not going to do that. So he supported her in that dream and said, go for it and do that. And she did. She accomplished that. So maybe he's got a dream that's independent of hers, and she can support him in that dream. And so that can be part of your conversation as well. Not only what do we have dreams for together, but what do we have dreams for individually? And then just work through these questions for about half an hour, and then we'll bring you into your group. Okay?